Over here. You guys see the screen okay? Yeah?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for that great introduction. I feel like a rock star after that introduction. Um, yeah, just a little bit of input before I start. You know, I am Canadian. I actually live in Oakville, Ontario, which is the home of Ford in Canada. So we have a car plant here in my hometown. You know, Oakville is just down the street, just around the bay from the biggest, you know, fourth largest city in North America, which is Toronto, and we're on the way around the bend to Niagara. So that's where I'm living. And yeah, so I wanted to, you know, just basically talk to you guys tonight about what I think is a very important subject, which is I'll you know, basically explain to you the initiative that we've recently written a book about, which is Take Back Manufacturing. But I'm going to focus on what you would be interested in, which is new product introduction and how reshoring will affect, as Don mentioned, you know, there's a lot of reshoring going on out there. So how would reshoring and new product introduction jive together? And I'm going to do the sort of what, why, and how on that environment. So obviously a big subject, a lot going on, and I'll introduce you to that as I go along. First of all, about me, you know, listen to all your backgrounds and your experiences. I am a Brit originally, although I've been in Canada 40 odd years. I've been in manufacturing and business 55 years. I grew up in the aerospace industry in Britain, home of the Concorde back in the day. And I came to Canada for the aerospace industry in 78. I very quickly moved to the high-tech electronics industry at Motorola. Ended up as director of manufacturing engineer. I am a manufacturing engineer by discipline. And that was a great, you know, great experience to be in the 1980s in the high-tech electronics, because we were changing the way we manufactured at that particular time. A lot of, you know, obviously lean implementation was big. Motorola invented the Six Sigma concept. So I was very much part of that as a department head. And so I got kind of, you know, cocky with a couple of guys from Hewlett Packard, and we decided to start our own consulting practice on lean thinking and Six Sigma consulting, that we spread the word and make some money. You know, we thought we'd make more money than being in industry. So within a year, we'd written our own book on the subject, and that's the first book. And it was really about lean thinking. So a lot of press. It was the right time to be an author on that particular subject. Interest rates were very high. Lean was riding high as a solution for industry, and we did a lot of work. In fact, you know, listening to your backgrounds and where you've been, this is my collage of all the companies I've supported worldwide on lean, and you can see it's kind of soup to nuts, pretty much everything that automotive, pharmaceutical. Hey, the whiskey distilling was pretty damn good. But there's a lot of other things, you know, a lot of stuff there that really put me into a position where I understood a lot of different processes, a lot of different businesses, how they work, and how they should be improved, and what their issues were. So that was really through the 90s. And then towards the end of the 90s, I was asked to go to Mexico and run a maquiladora plant for a couple of years. It was electronics. And that was really, you know, NAFTA was in full flow, and we were trying to get products out of Mexico. So I did a lot of new product introduction into Mexico for electronics combine. And then in 2004, I was asked to go to China. I was there for 6 years, moving product to China as a joint venture coordinator for globalized manufacturing, getting those 40-foot containers out of there. And there's a lot of pretty things and people in China, but manufacturing in China in 2004 wasn't one of them. There was a lot of quality and logistical issues to sort out. And we got through that. We had, you know, quite a lot of product range. This is probably a good example. You've probably driven the top left on a golf cart, and you've probably cut the grass with the bottom right. We certainly have the snowmobiles in Canada. But that was an interesting, you know, rule to try to get the Chinese to embrace a lot of new parts, metal and plastic parts, welded assemblies, sub-assemblies, and we did do some final assemblies as well for the Chinese market. So that was a good hard 6 years. After a while, we did build some really strong teams for new products and manufacturing. Now engineers worldwide, when they have success, they like to party and drink, and the Chinese are no different. They do it well too. They can participate very well in that. I made a lot of friends, signed a lot of contracts, and then I came home to my home to find that I'd been part of the hollowing out of our manufacturing base. There had been a significant amount of issues with the transfer of manufacturing. This would have been the 2000s, okay, 2000 to 2010. And so that was when a lot of the exodus of manufacturing took place. And we realized it wasn't just Canada. Canada took a beating, but it was a North American-wide problem. We lost a lot of manufacturing, certainly in the northeast segment of our country. And really, it was we moved a lot of stuff offshore for low-cost labor rates. If you were in a boardroom with your customer, they wouldn't even put you on a bidders list unless you had an offshore source. So it was uncontrolled trade, almost herd behavior, and we lost at least 20 points in our intensity of manufacturing. Put in the graveyard quite a few of those industries. I don't know if some of you have grown up in some of those industries, but some of them are completely eradicated. Some are hollowed out. Some are, not really a manufacturing entity in North America anymore. They're spotty from where they were. And I saw that journey. And so I went back, joined my Society of Manufacturing Engineers, and we talked it up, and we got all excited about how we'd all been part of this demise, and we decided to take it back. Very high-handed idea, but we started a forum dedicated to the restoration, a manufacturing forum based on the SME in Canada. You see the Canadian flag part of our initiative. And we did a lot of work. We did a lot of trade shows, raised awareness, talked it up, did a lot of shows with various other associations and societies, got a lot of traction with the media. We had a lot of educationalists assisting us with information. Local government did take a piece of interest. We basically were interested in the Canadian marketplace. And we did get the chance to talk to our government. There wasn't a lot of attention span. It was kind of difficult to get them to realize that, a post-industrialized society wasn't going to work for us. The services weren't going to pay the rent. Even if we had imports, even if we had resources to trade with, it just wasn't going to balance. So we didn't have a balanced economy. And it's beginning to show drastically. If you look at the outlook now in Canada, which I'm going to show you, it's a drastic lack of prosperity that's beginning to bite in now to the population. A lot of press. We got a lot of front page news. They even put me on the front cover, which is a challenge. And we basically, had I think once a month a long chat online on the videos with BNN. So we had a lot of press. I teamed up with Harry Moser very early in the game. We very much connected with the reshoring initiative in the US. Harry's very prolific, and we shared databases and do a lot of stuff that's to do with understanding where things are going with reshoring. So about a year or two back, I decided I'd start the book process, decided to document what we'd achieved, what we put together as the content. And we felt also it was time to take it back. So that is the book that we wrote. And it is basically soup to nuts on what happened to us as far as manufacturing and why we need to take it back. We believe it's time to talk about it now. We think that there's enough political positioning and situation now that it's a good time to talk about globalization being not perhaps the only solution. There is a change in perception now on globalization. Also, the effectiveness of long supply chains is in question. Also, there's some geopolitical stuff happening, which, is beginning to get people's attention. And there is reshoring happening. And it's happening quite well in the US, not so much in Canada. And we certainly need some more political will in Canada to make it happen. So the book talks to that. In fact, I covered everything that will prevent us from getting manufacturing back in the book. It's pretty much a tour de force of all of the issues: immigration, technology transfer, education, even the climate change, energy, everything that will get us away from being able to manufacture back in Canada again. So, what I'd like to do now is just give you a quick history. I'm going to keep it real tight. But, you got to realize that what we did in the last 35 years is liberalized our global free trade. We went for a global free trade environment. Quite frankly, many of us now, even economists, believe that it was an erroneous economic concept and probably bad geopolitics to go do what we did. We certainly didn't do it smartly. All the economists of the day must have slept through the course on lean because, what they did, they forced us back into a waste mode. They actually pushed us back into a wasteful process by extending the supply chains. We're finding that out the hard way now when we start looking at the costs of operating our businesses on long supply chains. So, yeah, what we did, we lost a lot of product. Those percentages are sort of more, the width of the product offerings rather than the actual revenue. But what we really lost was we lost the value chain. We lost the ability to understand how to integrate the raw materials and components into the products because they went offshore too. In fact, if you go to trade shows now, there's so much of the industrial process equipment that's made offshore because it went where the manufacturing's done. And there's a lot more artisan work now offshore about how to go to the next generation of equipment. The manufacturing technology is eroded, and especially the skill set. If you want to test your product to UL or CSA, you probably have to send the product offshore for testing because they took all the test facilities went with the manufacturing. And so we've lost the whole, R&D and product set, basically. We've lost that whole infrastructure for supporting products. What I like to do is just give you a couple of different, this is not low-end product that we lost. We lost the high-end stuff. So here's the automotive industry. Here's all the parts that go into a vehicle. And it's been globalized, significant globalized manufacturing. Some of it makes sense because where the raw materials are. Some of it, got to wonder why we did what we did. And the bottom line, I've got quite a bit about it in the book, but the bottom line is within USMCA, our content of vehicles we drive down the road is only 27%. So the average vehicle only has 27% value added made in the USMCA. We get to do the tailpipe in Canada, but it's a pretty small percentage when you boil it down. And the components, the average component distance is 2,600 miles to get to the assembly point. So it's a used part before you drive it off the lot. Aerospace industry, where I grew up, has gone completely apeshit global. Because if you look at the 787, look at where it's all made. There's a tremendous amount of issues in getting logistically everything in the right place at the right time. It wasn't just the manufacturing, it was also the development process was very protracted because of the activities. And they lost $4.2 billion quarterly in getting that sucker to market. Trade imbalance came with this. What you end up with if you do all this is trade imbalance. In 1980, global trade was if it was 1, we increased global trade by 8 times since 1980. It's 8 times more than it was back probably when we were pre-globalized. And yet global wealth, when you calculate it up with GDP, is only 3 times. So it's not been a heck of a good wealth creator. And in fact, wealth in the Western nation, you could argue, is flatlined or worse. And so it's not been a good wealth creator. It's been a wealth transfer system. That's really what globalization has given us in the last 30 years. Okay, trade deficit in the US, the area under the curve is now 50% of the GDP. You're not going to see that back in a hurry. And Canada always enjoyed a positive trade balance because of our resources. And now after the sort of, decade or two of having more and more imports, we've now seen a globalization trend to a negative trade balance. And that won't come back quickly. So it's wealth transfer. This is the Canadian manufacturing numbers. There's no other, we stripped out everything else out of the economy. So this is just manufacturing. We've seen a 10 times worsening of our trade deficit on manufactured goods, a 20% decline in our domestic share of what we buy. And that's related now to the redistribution of a lot of people out of manufacturing into lower paying service jobs. We almost aren't a global player now, manufacturing wise, and tremendous imbalances across main low-cost countries. Not pretty. In fact, what I also want to tell you is that service jobs that we were told were going to be part of our future. Yeah, we did eliminate about 40% of them with, lean and better office practices and computerization. But 60% of them were not eliminated; they were relocated offshore. So not only did we lose the manufacturing work, but we lost the associated service work that went with it. So offshore. So that's the dark tunnel that we've been in. And there is a little bit of light at the end of it. I want to tell you about. And it's about doing a very large lean study we did with Boston Consulting Group back in about 2012. We took stock of the situation, realized that we were in what's called a double bind on supply chains. In traditionally before the 70s or in the 70s, we would put our value stream close to the customer in North America, and we would then bring our own materials in as close as possible to that, and then we'd ship in whatever we didn't have. And that was really, close to the customer mentality with some offshore materials. Where we've gone, 2000 plus, is we've moved the value stream because of low-cost labor out. We've increased the amount of containerization by 8 times. And we've got that tremendous amount of recycle loop because we now have to support that value added offshore with additional material resources. So we have to send our materials out so that they can be sent back as product. And so you've got that large non-value added cycle now in the supply chain from where you were before. And that's why we've got long global supply chains. The outcome is long global supply chains. So what manufacturing is now globally is these ships revolving around the globe in these things, these waste machines. There's not very much manufacturing done. There's no manufacturing on these puppies. This is just to move them around. This is just to move inventory around with very expensive bunker fuel. And there's 90,000 of these things moving around the globe. By the way, if you look at the pollution, not CO2, but pollution in terms of other particle contamination, sea pollution, etc., they pollute 6 times more than all the cars in the world. They are dirty things. So that's where we ended up. We ended up with a global supply chain, a lot of ships taking material away, bringing it back as product. Not a very high waste factor, not very lean, certainly not green because there's a lot of pollution. Bottom left are the cost drivers. Those are real numbers. Top right in the red are the intrinsic non-value added steps. And by the way, this only operates with very low interest rates. Now, as interest rates start to climb, the cost of that inventory is going to be a huge trap for most businesses operating in those long supply chains. Okay, so what we're suggesting, what we looked at, is go back to a localized trade block, which is the USMCA mentality, and enforce it more, make sure it's totally enforced. It'll become lean and green. We can sink the ships. We don't need them so many. We can scrap them off. We will trade raw resources for people that need them for their own economy. We'll do balanced trade, and we'll have a local manufacturing, which will provide a strong incubation for innovation. Very fast response to the customer, less inventory. And if you look at the bottom right, you'll see that we've got an order of magnitude reduction in the intrinsic costs of the supply chain. So that's what we looked at. There's obviously back to the future. It's really scary when you think back that that's where we were in the 1990s. And really what we're now doing is adopting best supply chain practices and leaning out the process. Less transportation, less inventory, all those lesses are things you get with a localized manufacturing environment close to the customer. And obviously it's a big jerk for some of the economists who still talk about free trade, and I'm getting a lot of them now beginning to modify their behavior a little bit about, what's right and what's wrong about the future. But that is where we're going. The study we did with Boston Consulting in 2012 said by 2015 on paper will be at cost parity. So we've been on cost parity on landed costs for some time, but it takes a while for the politics and the industry to sort of get their head around that. But quite a lot of when you run the numbers, when you balance source, it doesn't make sense to go offshore in a lot of cases when you start looking at it. So we did that. a lot of reports. Advantage now clearly is localized manufacturing, especially with the trends of interest rates and all the other things going bump in the night in a global environment. 80%, and Don, I want to update you. We've got a lot of paper. 80% plus of corporations are now looking to reshore to North America. It is subject to recapitalization constraints. Got to wait for the capitalization cycle on whatever products or plant you got out there, but that's where we are. And I've got some paper on that I'll show you. I'll leave with you. So the study was, we looked at, when I was in China in 2010, we on paper thought we had a 25% advantage in being in China. When we really looked at it and started understanding the costs, and some of them were hidden to us, we started to expose the costs. We realized that, by 2015, we were kind of close to a tipping point. And now today, going forward through 20 and 25, it's probably a 15% advantage to stay home. On paper, for most commodities, not everything, there is going to be some hybrid discussion, but it definitely, when you run the numbers, don't get a good feeling that you should stay without. You should take a look at yourself before you shore anything off again. Here's another way to look at the same thing. Here's the volume versus dollars. So if you got a fridge versus an iPhone, the fridge takes up a lot of space in a shipping container. That's where the cost is driven from. And so the tipping point in 2012 made them both stay offshore. By 2015, it was clear that the white products in GE should come back. They're now in Mexico, most of them. And Caterpillar and John Deere that I was involved with have decided to bring back a lot of the heavy stuff that they were doing offshore if it's for local North American consumption. So heavy stuff's come back as we move on in 2025. I don't know about the iPhone itself, but some of the computers and network products will come back, especially with the chip manufacturing efforts that's going in right now. So we're going to see that tipping point move even further towards the benefit of localized manufacturing. Okay. So I keep getting questions from the college. Well, they keep asking, what about low-cost labor? Isn't that going to make a difference? Isn't that the only thing to look at? And I say, no, that's not the only thing that makes it cheaper. You can't just use that model anymore. It's about something called Industry 4.0. So if you look at a cost of a product with a lot of labor content, I'm not talking just direct labor, I'm talking total labor effort, all support costs, everything, and you automate it with Industry 4.0, it moves across the line. The delta costs, even if the offshore suppliers do the same, the contribution of labor is smaller once it's always automated. So that means with Industry 4.0, we move across the tipping point, and the cost of labor is lower because we've automated, and therefore it's a less advantage in going to a low-cost country with a long and expensive supply chain. So the supply chain rules the cost, not the labor. Okay, so as we move to new technologies, products with less labor content, more automation, we will not be able to leverage any advantage in low-cost labor. So Industry 4.0 done properly is a strong lever for taking back manufacturing. And of course, it's cyber physical. It's not the old Industry 3.0, which I grew up through. Most of us have lived through the third revolution, where we put computers and automation into our business. Cyber physical is actually taking the computer and putting it directly with the process without human intervention, which is a totally different game. So another generation or revolution of using computers. Okay, so there's 3 disruptive technologies that go with that. Obviously, advanced automation. It can touch and feel, it can see, it's sensorized. It's a lot smarter in terms of its ability to operate in an Industry 4 environment. We connect everything together, so the white collar activities are eliminated because we've got connectivity, and we've got, of course, we're right up to thoughtware now. We're getting the process to think for itself, so we have less and less interaction with the process. So that can't happen without a very strong Lean and Six Sigma mentality. The products have got to fit the process. The process has got to be lean, and you can't automate waste anymore. You've got to get rid of the waste. So what we're doing is we've got to get rid of the hands. No more hands. So the summary is that high numbers, above 70% and plus, American businesses need to go back and start looking at continuous improvement. We've had our eye on supply chains. We've taken our eye off the ball as far as our own plants' effectiveness is concerned. And so we got to go back and do continuous improvement. We will be using, as I said, advanced automation and AI. It's going to be a very integrated information environment. It's not just about machines. It's also about the whole infrastructure of the business, and that's Industry 4.0. And that's going to be a big deal. That's where the action is right now. And it's a huge marketplace for Industry 4.0. That's what I'm consulting on right now. And by the way, Don, if you want a special user awareness presentation, I can do a deeper dive on Industry 4. It's a huge subject. It's something that a lot of people are spending a lot of dough on right now. So going back to the future supply chain, really, it's the one idiom way to say it is make much more of what we consume with much more of our own resources. That's where our prosperity will kick back in. And then globalized supply chains are not going to be, I've given you a very sort of purist view. We must remain realistic but resolved. It's probably going to be a hybrid of both. We will reshore and rebalance, and there will be some commodities that will stay offshore and have to be brought in a conventional global way. And we have to balance that up again so that we add, the correct value in the right places in our economies. So it won't be a complete reversal. It's probably what we should have done in the first place, quite frankly. We overextended ourselves, and now we're rebalancing in a lot of ways. And that's what a lot of businesses are doing. They're trying to get closer to the customer, but they've still got some commodities that are well-tooled and well-capitalized offshore, which they have to keep there. So that's what the story is. We're going to push ourselves away from liberalized global trade towards a regional trade bloc environment. Two drivers. First one we've talked about, which is the business initiatives, which is lean principles, disruptive technologies, reevaluating the supply chain. And then the other one is the political driven initiatives. People are beginning to get a little testy. They want their prosperity back. And so we're going to see some politics helping the case. Both of those are going to play towards moving us towards a regional trade environment. So it's reshore, when possible or when ready, recapitalize, re-infrastructure, because we need to rebuild some of our infrastructure support. We got Rust Belt. We got to recover the Rust Belt. And of course, we got to also relearn. We got a lot of people that haven't been experienced in manufacturing. We got to re-educate our population on how to be a maker culture again. So here's the reasons for reshoring. Obviously, I've covered most of them already in a way. You're talking landed cost tipping point on paper, but there's also higher interest rates exposure. There's lead times. There's cultural issues, though we're pretty damn good at working with offshore participants. There will be with the politics, some import tax activity. Local funding support, we're obviously going to be investing, and we're going to want to invest in home. We're not going to be wanting to invest offshore anymore. So local government's going to control that. IP protection is a big deal. I think we've let the horse is way out of the barn, but whatever's left, we need to make sure we protect. And the Made Here label is very important to a lot of people now. And there's something called ESG compliance, which we have more chance of doing in our own backyard than doing it globally. And there's these huge geopolitical risks long term. Challenges, we got to rebuild our capability as far as rapid prototyping. We've still got to look at our local capacity. There's challenges in terms of reversing this flow that we've been experiencing in the last 30 years. So here's a study. Here's some good links you can go to. Put together. Thomas Net does a lot of good stuff on understanding the marketplace, where it's headed. They've got a report out, 83% report from Thomas Net, and also a bunch of others as well. Those links are hot. 83% are looking at it. It's a done deal. Half of them are already biting the bullet on investing in the Industry 4 environment. So it's happening. Reshoring is happening. And there's some economic reimagining going on in terms of just how much more factories we'll build. it's going to take a little bit of organization. I think the U.S. are far much more ahead than Canada. We're beginning to sort of line ourselves up a little bit more in Canada. We've got some funding, we've got some focus, but I got to tell you something. It's taken 30 years to get to the state we're in. It's not going to come back in 30 days. Okay, in terms of the industries, I've done a lot of work in the furniture manufacturing industry. It's coming back in spades because if you want a custom kitchen, you do that locally. If you're in Canada, you got all the wood, you got all the steel. I mean, what the hell are you playing at? Just make so the furniture manufacturing industry is booming because people realize that they can get it in a couple of weeks, not 8 weeks, and there's no inventory. Okay, so you'll see from to furniture industry is going to be a huge migration to localized. Electronics products will happen because of the chips. Once you get the chips back, you're going to see the assembly come. Appliances is already here. It's been moving fast. Food and drug is another one that the government's very into. That's going to happen. Automotive, I think, would be a question of when we recapitalize for the EV or hybrid market, then there's an opportunity to do it right. So on all those particular types of industry sectors, there will be some transitional movement back to reshoring. And probably, I said 10 years, it might be longer, but it's going to be, I think it needs 10 years to see those kind of numbers happen. But that's still 1/3 of what it's took us to get in the state we're in. But But, as I said, it took 30 years to get to this uncontrolled state. And if we're lucky, it's 10 years to get back. We do need to keep our stick on the government to make sure that they don't confuse themselves. We need to make sure we adhere to the USMCA rules, that we enforce a trade bloc environment. We need to make sure that we provide the right energy, and we want to make sure our democracy doesn't keep getting in the way. And it has a habit of doing that when we try to do something as long-term as this. Capability, we've got to reverse our declining product process knowledge. The baby boomers are retiring. We got a lot of work to do on that. I teach at 2 colleges part-time, putting my bit back in to try to get the next generation. They're doing advanced manufacturing at these colleges. So it's good. New technologies, facilities, infrastructure. We got to rebuild clusters, local capability availability of raw resources. Some of those have been switched off. They got to be switched back on. Energy concerns me in some sectors where we're trying to build plants so we don't have the power stations built. So we got to, reverse our energy demographics to get to the right place. And of course, the skilled labor. Caution. I've said all this in a kind of purist way, but we've given the offshore guys 30 years to develop a capability. We've supported them. We've been part of actually training an offshore resource to do, provide our products. And they're still there, and they're still very effective and very competitive. And so it's a journey in building your own capability where you still have to use and transition from the offshore sources. So there's a balancing act to do there, which will require some careful management. But yeah, I was in China 6 years. Those guys the guys I trained in China are now senior managers. They're good. They got good systems, and they got their own IP, and they're a force to be reckoned with. Let's not underestimate the challenge of actually turning off an offshore supplier that's doing a good job and bringing it home and doing it ourselves. We got to be ready. The solution, of course, is we got to do 3 things in parallel. We got to have a government that's going to set the policies correct. We need an educational system that will support the whole thing, because a lot of it's to do with the ability to have the right people in the right places. And industry's got to do what I just said. They got to make sure they have a strong supply chain strategy. They're doing the right things on lean and industry 4.0. So a lot to do. And those 3 initiatives are what really we call TBM. I describe in detail how those need to unfold in the book. So what's the impact on reshoring as far as new products are concerned? What I thought I'd do is just give you just a quick footprint of what a new product's life cycle looks like. To me, you start with an idea, you do some R&D, you prototype it, which is a journey in itself, and then you go through a pilot volume production um, a transition, and you've got like two real phases: pilot, build, and commercialization. That's what most people put together. It involves early funding, development, product, market, and customer, and you've got that cost curve that it goes with the new product life cycle. Okay, so what we have though in our life now is many practitioners and agile corporations that understand how to do it. I mean, there's methodology. If I just quickly explain, if you want to be really good at new product introduction, you need seamless NPI team structures. You need teams that can work as product teams so they can plan and do stuff. And make sure that they also supply partner and close to the customer culture, so that you've got not only your engineering team and your business team, but your suppliers and your customers embedded in this seamless NPI team structure. Second thing is you need a strong procedure. A lot of people, there's a lot of tools out there. If you're automotive, you'll be using an APQP system. If you're, electronics company, you use a phase review, and you've got stage gate. So all these tools are available, and a lot of people are using them, whether it's CAE, design for manufacturability, rapid R&D, testing, and managing short cycle decisions. If you can do that, then you have a very rapid NPI procedure. We need also financing. In Canada, we've got some fairly helpful financing environments where we can quickly finance a new product. So you got sync stage funding with NPI plans, good controls, and effectively also good ways of measuring, so you can actually go in and measure. The point is, all these things, if you're doing it right, you probably have these things on the page, right? If you look at all these things, would they work better onshore than offshore? You can make anything work, but would it look better onshore? So if you take the next slide, this is all the things that if they are important to your business, you would do, and they all are part of the other list. So the point is, new product introduction, this is like a supply chain checklist, would work better if these things were home and onshore, because there's you've got a lot more energy to put in to actually make them work offshore. So you look at this list, that's the perfect world list of things to do. And most of this list is things you'd want to see in a tighter, shorter runs. You can do more locally. You've got landed cost advantage, trade block, compliant taxes and tariffs might bite you if you don't have it inside your own trade block. Whatever way you look at this list, and each business will look at this list differently. Every company will say, okay, I'm more concerned about flexibility or being close to customer than say the actual cost. So it's a question of understanding the perfect world of what you want to do for your new product system, and then designing the shape of your future so that it works for your business. So as we move forward, in the past, what we've had, if this is kind of like 1980 when I was at Motorola, everything was local. We went down the street in local clusters to get things done. And then, in the near past, mid-2000, I bought a plane ticket, and we may have piloted it or piloted it on in North America, but then we would send it to China to be offshore produced. Where we are currently is a mix. You've got some situations where we're onshore, offshore, where it's actually overlapping prototyping, and some where actually some in the academic world now where North American academia comes up with an idea and partly does the R&D, and it's offshore to an R&D center to be completed. So we got the whole spectrum of activities where we don't even go past the idea stage very far before we offshore it. That's where we are today. Most people are actually prototyping locally and then sending it offshore for volume, but it varies. The future, you want linearity. You want your commercial process to be linear. So you either do it all onshore, or where there's components that are going to be offshore eventually anyway, you validate them onshore and then send them offshore. So those are the two models for the future. That assumes that USMCA is the onshore and somewhere outside is offshore. I include Mexico as being part of onshore. Okay. So rules, how you do it? Always, even though I've just talked it up about, moving from where you are to where you want to be, you always got to pick the most capable current provider. You can't blow your brains out with the next generation of product. But be aware of the reshoring dynamics that are being undertaken in that particular sector, and decide, make a decision pretty early on how you're going to engage in that supply chain. So really what you need to understand is where your volume supply chain is going to be. If it is going to be local, then you stay home. If you have to go offshore, then you make that decision. Try to keep it linear so you don't have to do early prototyping and then repeat it at the pilot stage. So you want to ensure early prototype tooling journey is integrated with the eventual volume manufacturing. So you have to look forward to where your volume manufacturing is going to be, taken into stock of what the reshoring dynamic is, getting it right, and then making sure you've got, your manufacturing and development process integrated so you go right from prototyping right into volume without too much design for manufacturability repeat. You got to understand the future manufacturing technologies. They're going to be vastly different than they've been. There's going to be a lot more capital put in, a lot more new technology. It'll be a different kind of product set, different kind of process when we reshore. And you've got to start asking yourself, what is your engagement with your supply chain? The supply chain is going to drive the cost, and because that's where the initiative and the capital is going to be put. You got to get it right. So who do you ask? Well, I think every time you talk to somebody now after this presentation, you should be asking where the stuff's made, what the future looks like in terms of the manufacturing footprint. You've got to start asking these providers that do the one-offs for you, what the long-range plan is, your custom part manufacturers. If you've got an integrated manufacturing service provider where they do soup to nuts for you, what's their long-term strategy? Distributors even are now looking at localizing some of their parts. So you have to find out exactly what the supply chain looks like. I think the support consultants, like the guys I work with, are definitely pursuing an understanding of where the supply chains are. Below the line here, there's a couple of, ThomasNet. It's pretty good. It got a lot of articles about reshoring, and Reshoring Initiative has got a balanced sourcing tool, an estimating toolkit you can use to see where your costs are, at least to know whether it's worth pursuing, some quotes and so on. So this is just a worry list of things. This is really how I would engage in somebody, asking them questions about reshoring. These are the questions you could ask yourself or your short-term or long-term providers. Are you locked up yet? If you're not, do you know the political business world where it's heading in terms of the evolution of a supply chain? Is your sourcing journey balanced? Is there an outlook for a reaction to a different transition of reshoring? Do you understand the benefits versus hidden costs? This is a big one. How do you know the real costs? Have you ran those numbers into a model? And do you understand what they are? And have you got validation with quotes? And have you correctly selected each product, materials, and services so it can be done, or in terms of local capacity? And there's risks. I'm not arguing. There's a lot of risks in how we manage the transition. And so I think what you do is you start asking around, these people I mentioned just now, where they are in the process per sector. And it depends on what sector you're dealing with as to whether it's something you need to worry about. Final comment, an important part of new product introduction now, is, besides making it meet the market requirements, making sure it functions, is making sure that you invest in the correct supply chain, because the hidden costs are there. You're going to have to face the fact that you may not have any, in some cases, may not have any choice but to actually bring the work home because of the politics. So it's important that, ask the right questions about the supply chain as much as the technology and the product itself. Okay. I've added a whole bunch of information on what I do. I just thought I'd throw that in, Don, and you can buy the book on my website. And with that, I'll take questions.
Very nice. Very cool. Yeah, if you send those links to me later, Nigel,
I
I will get them out.
I'd love
Uh,
yeah. I think the deal is I'll send you the whole package if you
okay.
send me the video you done.
All right. You got a deal.
You know, yeah. And I apologize. I should have said I had a cold. I was in Turkey last week, and I got a cold, so my voice was not the perfect world.
Oh.
So I got through it, but